Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Research Roadshow. Today is December 6th, and I am John Wilkins, the host for tonight's show called The Italian Job. As many of our viewers and subscribers are aware, I spent over 30 years living in Italy before coming to Temperance, Michigan and joining Neighborhood News. There is a long backstory, but the short of it is that I thought I would find America by going to Italy, and I did very well during the last part of the Italian miracle, and then around roughly 2005, things started to taper off, and it wasn't quite as beautiful living in Italy or in Europe in general as I had originally thought. And so that prompted my gradual return to the United States, the land where I was born, specifically Ohio. A lot of our subscribers are writing in telling us that they're very concerned about where the country is going, especially after the recent round of elections in the United States. They're concerned about the things like the World Economic Forum, things that are happening in Europe, the IMF, the World Bank, the WHO, all of these supranational bodies that are taking more and more control over various aspects of our economy, of our ministries of health, ministries of defense, etc. And it appears to most people like there's no compass, there's no map, there's no way to navigate our way out of the rough seas we're finding ourselves in and the even rougher seas that we're approaching. But there are a few lessons to be learned from history, especially recent history in Europe, where things were not as easy and not so cut and dried as the history books attempt to tell us. We are all human beings, and the forces that govern us, the forces that govern each individual, the forces surrounding each family, each community, are largely the same that people had 200 years ago, 500 years ago, and 2,000 years ago. So I want to take this will be the first of at least three lessons, history lessons, trying to gain what we can, to glean what we can from Italy's history between roughly 1837 and 2003, 2004, just after the start of the war in Iraq. Italy was, and to some extent still is, a conglomeration of 19 different countries. And within those 19 countries, there were 3, 4, 5, or 6 different provinces that enjoyed some degree of autonomy up until 1848. So let's take a look at the map. the map of Italy in the early 1800s. One moment while I pull that up. Like I said, I said in previous broadcasts that Europe since 1200 has had over 500 wars. Some smaller, some larger. Obviously, the two biggest ones, World War I and World War II. But there has been a pretty much constant wartime mentality in most parts of Europe for a long time. Because as the economists of the late 1800s explained, we have limited resources, and so there's a constant battle with other provinces, with other groups, and against Mother Nature for those limited resources. That's, in theory, that's the primary source, the primary driver for most wars. Where did I put that folder? Okay. Good evening, Michael. How's my sound? Hope it's better than last time. All right, so here we have a map of Italy around the turn of the 18th century. And you see the region that I know best is the one in green, the former Kingdom of Sardinia, which was largely a part of the House of Savoy. The House of Savoy had a foot in France and a foot in Italy, what would become Italy, and there was a constant state of flux, especially in the Mediterranean, where territories were constantly being won and lost. But the Kingdom of Sardinia included not only the island of Sardinia, but also a large part of Savoy, of the House of Savoy. So here we have let me zoom in a little bit. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that after 1785, basically, when it looked like the United States, the former colonies of North America, the British colonies of North America, had gained pretty much their independence from Great Britain, this concept, this idea of liberty, of freeing yourself of your territory from the mothership, from the larger kingdom, was not lost on a lot of wealthy people in Europe. And so, especially in the northern provinces of the Kingdom of Sardinia, there were groups of people, some as small as 1,500 kilometers squared, and some as large as 6,000 kilometers squared, that really thought they could do much better for themselves if they could just break free of the House of Savoy or of any of the other kingdoms surrounding them. And later in about 30, 40 years after this map here, we come to, you don't see it here, but in pink, you have the small and growing kingdom of Lombardy. Now, there's an important figure in history, in Italian history, named Giuseppe Garibaldi. Garibaldi is one of the most accomplished, if not the most accomplished general in the period of 1750 to the Second World War. And he was He was not involved only in the unification of Italy, but he was also involved in the civil war down in Brazil and a civil war in Uruguay. So he was, a major figure in 3 different wars. Let's pull up the other map. Now, why am I showing these maps over here? Because what we see today happening at the level of the corporate structure and the interplay between corporations and government and para-governmental entities and the population isn't that dissimilar from what was going on in the early 1800s. For example, and I'll start with Garibaldi's entry into Lombardy. So roughly 1833, Garibaldi goes down to Brazil. He makes his name known there in the civil war down in Brazil. He comes back up, and he has letters from Abraham Lincoln, from major political figures throughout Europe, inviting him to come help in their particular war. And Garibaldi has his choice of war or conflicts, areas of conflict to choose from. And he ultimately winds up in Lombardy, and he promises a small section, a small province in present-day Lombardy, just north of Brescia, who have been longing for independence for a long time. And he says, okay, guys, I see your situation. I will do my best to put together an army for you so that you can become not only independent of the Kingdom of Lombardy, but also of the Habsburgs, the Austrians, and independent of the Swiss, and independent of the House of Savoy, whoever might want to take over your kingdom once you break free of Lombardy. And the wealthy men of the area, the dukes and princes said, well, a few of the wealthy, of the nobility, wanting to break free, said, it's a deal. You help us with the military strategy, we'll come up with the money, and you will be heavily rewarded if you're successful. Because people saw how well the Americans were doing, economically at least, with their independence. So this idea of becoming independent of the rulers, present day rulers, is very strong. It has gained quite a foothold. But lo and behold, 15 years after they made the deal with Garibaldi, they're not only still a part of Lombardy, they're now a part of a unified Italy. So that adds another layer of government, or another layer of, they've actually gone down a level in sovereignty, right? The key word here, I'm going to use it frequently over the next couple of weeks, the key word is sovereignty. Everyone's heard the expression, a man's home is his castle. That is very roughly the basic idea, that you have sovereignty if you make the big decisions. The sovereign is the ultimate decision maker within the group. So here, these men expected to become their own sovereigns by giving Garibaldi this treasure chest to build the army with, and they never really controlled how he was doing it. They didn't have embedded inspectors, or some of their own group within the army to keep tabs on Garibaldi's progress and whether or not he wasn't making secret deals with people up in Switzerland, in Piedmont, in down in Genoa, in various parts of Venice, especially the bankers in Venice. Plus, down in Brazil, he had made a few enemies, and many of those enemies had relatives, cousins back up in Italy. So the main fault of these men who desired independence was not to, they wanted to just throw money at the problem. They didn't really want to do the hard work of making sure Garibaldi was holding up to his end of the bargain. Let me go check. All right, let me stop share there for a second. The long and short of the point I'm trying to make here is that there has always been a desire for freedom, but very rarely does that desire for freedom translate into the very hard work, the tedious work required to gain that freedom and maintain it. And I'm sure many of you have read John Locke and his contemporaries talking about how hard it is to become free and what to do with your freedom once you obtain it. So we're going to show just one more map, and then I'll move on to the main topic. Okay, here we have a picture of Giuseppe Garibaldi, and I'm not finding that other map. No, that's not it. We'll get to him later. All right. In this portrait, Garibaldi is wearing his famous red coat, and the men he commanded, roughly 1,200 very loyal men, they were called the Red Shirts, Camicia Rossa. Garibaldi was a very driven man. Once he latched onto an idea, a ideological idea, or became loyal to a prince or a duke, he never wavered. He kept going. In the case of Vittorio Emanuele II, Victor Emmanuel II, he said he was going to unify Italy, and he did it. And not without a lot of bloodshed, not without some pivots, but he did what he said. He did have a very strong sense of honor. And many Italian historians have written about were dismayed at the fact that present-day generals didn't have a tenth of his sense of honor. Now, why can't I find? Well, I'll just talk through it. All right, let's go back to the opening song, which was the Inno di Mameli, the Italian national hymn. This is the only national hymn I know of where the phrase, "We are ready for death, we are ready to die for the country," appears not once, not twice, but 8 times. Count them, 8 times in the national hymn. We are ready to die for this concept of Italy, a unified Italy that will break free from the chains of the Habsburgs, free from the chains of the Catholic Church, free from the chains of the French emperors, and everything will be rosy. Once we are free of all these chains, we're gonna go rocketing skyward. There's no limit. Victory is ours. We just have to be ready to die. Now, if you're 6 years old, here we're getting back to the propaganda aspects. Everyone thinks that Smith Month is something we've never had before. If you are 6 years old, if you're a young child, especially male, who hears from the age of 6 till the age of 15, 8 times, every time they sing the hymn, "We are ready to die, we are ready to die," then it becomes embedded deep within him that you have to be ready to die for your country. No matter who's heading it up, no matter which men are behind the curtain, my country, like my mother, no matter how many wrongs she does, I have to do everything I can, even give my life for her. But Italy, the concept really never materialized. Italy in the song is kind of like our Statue of Liberty in the States. A young woman with a beautiful robe flowing in the wind and laurels on her head and holding a sword of victory. This concept of a unified Italy that would become, they envisioned the next Renaissance, that from 1860 to the 1900, there would be an ulterior Renaissance period with many megagalactic works of art and architecture, you name it. But that never actually happened. And instead of breaking free of the chains of the French emperors and the Habsburgs and of Rome, they actually became even more enslaved. Quite the opposite. Although there were some benefits to unification, don't get me wrong, but the original desire, the trick that Garibaldi pulled on some of these counts in Lombardy happened to various other parts of the various other kingdoms in the peninsula as well. So they were promised, and I'll get to my point in just a second. They were promised one thing. They were promised independence or some form of more autonomy, and in giving the lives of their young men to the cause, they actually achieved the opposite. At best, they remained neutral. There was no effective change, but in most cases, they became part of the "quote unquote" unified Italy, and lost their sovereignty. So, back to the song again. The propaganda, as soon as the unification happens, roughly, experts differ on whether the unification ended in 1960 or 1861 or in 1871. But the propaganda, they put Mameli to the task of writing the national hymn right away to keep the young men's hearts on this idea of we are stronger together. Now, where have I heard that stronger together motto before? What I'm driving at is that it wasn't just a grassroots movement in the House of Savoy that led to unification of the peninsula. It was also there was a lot of maneuvering by certain powerful men in Switzerland, specifically in Zurich, and in Lyon, in Paris, and in other capitals around Europe. they were they knew these powerful figures were putting money into the war effort, the unification effort, under the table, because they saw a benefit to a unified Italy. Why is that? Because and this is the whole idea behind unified Europe, that fewer kingdoms meant fewer people you had to control to achieve your ultimate end, and a lower risk that any small group of people, a nation of 2,500 square kilometers with just 70,000 people, could actually become independent. Now one almost did in Val d'Aosta. They almost gained their independence, but that was what these pan-European powers were exactly trying to avoid by forcing the unification of Italy. All right, let me take a minute to ban this, block this user here. All right, another analogy between the present day situation and that of the middle 1800s in Italy. We have, there was a much, the Italian sense of economy. How would I put this? Because Italy was an agricultural society, and agricultural work was by definition very hard. There were no automatized combines, especially air-conditioned combines. It was hard work under the sun for 10, 12, 14 hours a day. And money was not easy to come by. So after the unification of Italy, the Vittorio Emanuele II, and the princes of the territories that he had just conquered had to make a lot of deals in order to convince the large landowners to pledge their allegiance. For example, they promised low taxes. Where have we heard that before? They promised that if they had lost a son in the unification effort, that any future wars against France or whoever, they would not have to send another son into the war. There was a lot of deal making, because to avoid separatist movements, they had to offer something. They had to offer some kind of long-term stability, economically and militarily, in order to have. Remember, there was no social net back then, so this deal making was very necessary. One of the masterminds of these kinds of fine, first of all, treaties with other nations, surrounding nations, and of the deals to be made with large landowners for their loyalty, was the Cavour. Not Benjamin. What am I thinking of? Cavour was a model statesman. He was extremely diplomatic in everything he did. He knew the terrain, the geopolitical terrain. He'd been in each of the foreign countries multiple times. He knew many of the nobility and statesmen in the other countries. So Cavour's ability to forge this, to structure treaties and agreements such that none of the 19 kingdoms separated was to his credit. The closest figure that I can, well, it's kind of a weak analogy, but I would say that Zbigniew Brzezinski was loosely along the lines of this this figure of Cavour. But why did I bring that up? Because Cavour foresaw that the people, the foreign powers that had put in a good bit of money to guarantee the unification effort wanted something in return, and that would be especially with the arrival of the industrial age, that would be the ability to start putting factories. Factories didn't mean like a present day GM factory. A factory back then was a small group of 20 or 30 peasants working in a large warehouse kind of structure. But these factories, the foreign powers wanted very badly the rich agricultural land, and to tap into, especially in the northern parts of Europe, they wanted in return for them financing the unification effort, they pretended to have some leeway, some rights, if you will, to put these factories on the farmlands of the Italian peninsula. So there was the present day, and John O'Loughlin gets into this quite a bit. The powers that be that were acting behind the scenes during the American Revolutionary War were largely the same that acted during the Italian unification, and many of the secret societies that John O'Loughlin refers to were obviously present in up and down the Italian peninsula. The secret societies really wanted to break free of Rome. They wanted to see specifically they wanted to break free of the Vatican and the Papal States, the different civilian powers within the Papal States. And in fact, it took an additional 11 years and a good bit of money to finally conquer Rome, and to, I think it was in 1873, come out with the agreement that the Vatican would yield all earthly powers to the new Italian state. That was a major achievement, and most of the figures in that were part of our version of Skull and Bones. This idea, and already eugenics, remember, eugenics starts in 1820, not with Margaret Sanger. Eugenics largely starts in 1820. This idea that scientifically, and here we have yet another analogy, the Italian unification effort produced a lot of injured men. And with injured men, we have the opportunity to gain scientific knowledge, the different kinds of wounds that developed. And many of the, I'm wondering now, rereading some of the history books, I'm wondering if biological agents weren't used already in 1860 there on the peninsula. I'm sure if they had the capability, they really wanted to conquer Rome. So they were willing to do anything to obtain that objective. So it wouldn't have been beyond them to use biological, fleas or ticks or something else. What am I driving at, really? A lot of people are wringing their hands. They're watching the stock market saying, oh no, what do we do? What do we do? We have to impress upon people that there's very little new under the sun. I think that there are only three new things under the sun. And the first is the atomic bomb, or fear of the atomic bomb. And, John O'Loughlin and Mark Kulek have gone thoroughly through this subject of how the powers that be have used fear of the bomb to greatly influence our decision making in every state, from Maine to California. Also, the internet. The internet changes the dynamics of decision making, because back in the day, a decision was taken on the basis of news that traveled by foot or by horse. So you would get a decision maker in a certain province or country would receive news 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 days after it actually happened. And then he would spend a few days assimilating this information into the other pieces of information that he'd assembled. And then he would make a proactive decision based on this information. Nowadays, the human brain hasn't gotten much bigger since then or faster, but we have the news cycle coming at us so fast. We have 30 or 40 or 50 major pieces of news coming at us every single day, and we don't have the time to let one single piece of information assimilate into our head. So the internet has made it has made it harder for us to take good, sound decisions for our family and for our local neighborhood and for the larger city of which we're a part. But even at the time, even though internet has made it has rapidly increased, made it much faster, this news cycle, what it did not do was change the character of misinformation. A lot of people have this idea that misinformation starts with the creation of the CIA in 1948. It doesn't. Even during the Italian unification, during the French Revolution, there were people, there were colonels and generals that were playing for the opposite side. There were double agents, triple agents, and quadruple agents. There was a constant battle to find out who can you trust. Any general, any statesman, any diplomat constantly faced this difficult task of figuring out if he could really, really trust another party. It's slightly different today because of the aforementioned internet, and there's so many more people involved in the calculus of deciding if a person is trustworthy or not trustworthy. But it's still, there was information back then. I heard a good story from my father-in-law about a time that there was a siege. Turin was under siege, and a letter was sent to one general asking for. One general wrote to another general asking to end the conflict, and a non-Italian or non-Turinese entity intercepted the letter, broke the seal, rewrote it, and then somehow put the same seal back on. But to do that, you had to have a copy of the original seal. That was very hard to come by. But the people in Zurich are still very good at that kind of thing. And we'll come to that later when we talk about the WHO. The third thing that's different with respect to 200 years ago, I think, is just my personal opinion, having lived in two countries, is the lack of honor. The most Italian men back in the day had a very strong sense of honor, and it was, you had to move to a different town or even a different country if you became known as dishonorable. If you were you told lies left and right, or if you broke your oath, if you cheated someone out of a large sum of money, you couldn't show your face in town anymore. And I think that is a big part of the reason that the Italian unification was successful to a large degree, and that none of the provinces ever managed to break free, or really ever wanted to break free, because the men tended, by and large, to keep their word. Nowadays, throughout Europe, it's very difficult for us to do business with an American businessman, because it's almost a given that the American businessmen will lie. Not that we in Europe are saints, but it's become so embedded as part of American culture now that you turn on the television and you expect to hear lies. You go to the debate between two politicians and you expect them to lie through their teeth, and it's really bad. One of our subscribers wrote to me today saying, "Did you see the debate between so and so and so and so?" I was embarrassed to have my 15-year-old listening to that. Embarrassed. The young people today, what kind of opinion are they forming of us adults as a group? And I'm sure it's not terribly different in many other countries today in the West. But it's anyway, those three things: the atomic bomb, the internet, and a lack of honor are the three big differences with respect to the 1840s. But, and this is my final point, this is the point for which I started the series. We are in a battle, a very severe battle for humanity 1.0. Because the default, if we choose to do nothing, if we choose to just do, go about our daily lives like we always do, maybe with a half hour here and there of our conspiracy theorist or conspiracy analyst business, the default is we're going to arrive at some form of transhumanism. And as a minimum, we're going to see these megacities. They're projecting 300 cities with 26 to 30 million people. And I've personally seen the plans for San Antonio, the new San Antonio with 28 million people, part of a multi-volume set. I know it was executed, this whole work was done by NATO because I worked for 30 years with NATO documents. So the Megacities project with human beings that are not quite human the way I grew up thinking of human is going to happen if we choose to do nothing. It's going to be a major battle, and if we don't fight tooth and nail, if we don't stop listening to both the fear mongers, oh my gosh, China's going to invade in 5 years. And if we don't stop listening to the people pushing the hopium, oh, it'll be okay, things will resolve themselves. Or there's a bunch of generals on with shining armor, riding on white stallions that'll come to save us. If we don't resist both of those groups and demand the truth, demand a minimum of integrity, then we're going to have to fight some major wars, kinetic wars later on, and or be subject to a staged biological war, which I think could be even worse. That's essentially my point tonight, is that not very many things have changed. The people want to become independent. People have wanted to become independent the way the United States did in 1776 for a long time, but they're not willing to do the very, very hard work it requires to gain and maintain that independence. Force people to, what you and I all have to do is to go to the library, force our neighbors and friends to go to the library, get them to think, get them to ask the difficult questions of their quote unquote betters. And here I'll pull up a small graphic. This is somewhere around here I have a notebook with this graphic on it. It took us 755 years to gain the right to think. So this could be the generation that blows it. We have to think hard, and then act on what we know. Cut through the red tape, cut through the disinfo, talk to each other, talk to people that you mainly disagree with, find common ground, force each other to go back through the past 60 years of the Smith month, of the lying mainstream media, force them to tease out what actually happened, because we are in a war with very real victims, like the 8,000 kids in Strongsville. We're in a very real war with very real victims, and it's going to get worse unless we do our best to show each other how to use our very human brains to come up with a solution that's different than the globalist pre-planned solution. Anyway, enough for tonight. I'm going to do another one of these next Tuesday. And tomorrow we have on Citizens Intel, we have a Zoom meeting tomorrow night. And then we have a Protect the Nest at noon on Friday. So look for the announcements of those two. And I'll see you next Tuesday for another edition of The Italian Job. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.